Hello, this video suggests that the mathematics on your screen resolves the double slit experiment in the delayed choice quantum eraser. So let us begin with one particle, not a bunch of particles, not a beam, not a crowd, just one particle for now, an electron, a photon, one tiny quantum event at a time. We fire it toward a wall with two narrow slits. Behind the slits is a screen. If we were dealing with tiny classical pellets, the story would be easy. Some pellets go through the left slit, some through the right slit. They hit the screen in two bands. Nice and tidy, very materialistic, very comforting. But that's not what nature does. When particles are sent one at a time through a double slit arrangement, each one arrives at the detection screen as a localized dot that looks particle-like, but after many dots accumulate, the total pattern becomes an interference pattern. So anybody watching this should understand this experiment before we go in. So the classic double slit experiment is famous precisely because it gives us individual particle rivals building a wave-like distribution. So ordinary common sense is already in trouble. And the particle arrives as a dot. A collection of dots forms a wave pattern. And if you are imagining the electron as a tiny baseball, congratulations, your baseball has just embarrassed itself in front of quantum mechanics because it doesn't do that. The usual question is, where did the particle go? Which slit did the particle go through? That is a question almost everyone asks. It is the question that traps the mind in the wrong picture, because the question assumes the particle had a classical biography. It assumes the electron had a little travel diary, like, "Dear diary, today I went through the left slit," just because it didn't want to confuse a biologist later. But the experiment resists that story. If both slits are open and know which path information exists, an interference pattern builds, and we arrange the experiment so that we can know which path the particles took. The interference disappears. The pattern changes when the experiment contains path information. That is the first great lesson. The experiment is not merely revealing a hidden route. The experiment is deciding what kind of history can be meaningfully selected. So if there is no which path record, then the alternatives remain jointly available. The histories left slit and right slit have not become separately record compatible. Their amplitudes still cooperate. They interfere. But if a detector records the path, then the experimental world now contains a path-specific record. The possible histories no longer blend in the same way. The history must now be compatible with the record. Interference fades or disappears. So the better question is not which slit did it really go through. The better question is, which history did the entire experiment permit? The shift sounds small, but it's not small. It's the resolution. It's the materialist mind wants a pellet and a path. Quantum mechanics gives us an event and a context. The materialist wants a tiny object with a private route. The experiment gives us a pattern that depends on what can be known, recorded, distinguished, and finally integrated into one coherent result. It's not magic. It's finishing quantum mechanics. The only way to resolve it without paradox. It's not the electron got shy when it was watched. That cartoon has done terrible damage. The electron is not embarrassed. The detector is not gossiping. The universe is not running a school dance. The point is information, distinguishable record structure, and the class of histories that can remain coherent come from the mathematics on the screen. When the two paths are indistinguishable, interference is possible. When the two paths become distinguishable, interference is lost. That is the experiment speaking. So we can make it more vivid. In a courtroom, a suspect entered a building. There are two doors, door A and door B. No camera saw which door was used. No fingerprints distinguish the route. No witnesses can tell. The case cannot honestly support a door-specific story. The courtroom must treat both route histories as jointly open. They're in superposition. Now install a camera at door A. Suddenly, the case changes, not because the suspect magically changed clothes, not because the camera pushed him, but because the record now allows a door-specific history. A record changes. What kind of history can be responsibly told? The double slit is the quantum courtroom. No path record, interference compatible history. The path record, route compatible history. That is already more useful than the usual little cartoon of a particle sneaking through two doors wearing a wave costume. Richard Feynman famously emphasized the double-slit experiment as containing the central mystery of quantum mechanics. The single electron versions, including the Murley-Mazzaroli-Posey experiment in 1974 and later famous visual demonstrations with individual electrons, show the strangeness cleanly. Individual detections occur one by one, yet the interference patterns accumulate over time as if they interfered. This is why the double slit is not merely a physics trick. It is a philosophy trap with crazy implications for a long time until this mathematics. The individual dot says particle. The accumulated pattern says wave. The witch path detector says record. The loss of interference says selected route history. The missing piece is to understand that measurement is not passive photography. Measurement is not merely looking at little classical fact already sitting there, patiently waiting to be discovered. Measurement determines what kind of fact can become part of the final history. Memory in this model is collapsed. That is why the double slit is so dangerous to naive materialism. Materialism likes objects with definite properties moving through linear time. Double slit says, slow down. The object does not come with the kind of classical biography you were hoping for. The history depends on the total arrangement. The particle does not owe you a classical past. Wheeler asked a more disturbing question. What if the choice of what kind of experiment we perform is delayed? The delayed choice quantum eraser. What if the decision about whether to observe wave-like interference or particle-like path behavior is made after the photon has already entered the apparatus? Wheeler's delayed choice experiments were designed to challenge the idea that a photon must have a definite wave or particle identity through its journey. In later laboratory versions, including work using interferometers, the choice of measurement arrangement can be delayed until very late in the experiment. At first glance, this sounds insane. The photon has already gone through, and then we decide what kind of measurement to make. So did the photon go back and edit its behavior? Did it receive a memo from the future? Did it call customer support and ask which ontology package had been purchased? No, but that's the cartoon version. The better lesson is this mathematics. The final experimental arrangement determines which history description is meaningful. Wheeler's lesson was not that the photons are tiny time travelers with commitment issues. It was that we should not attribute a simple classical tangible travel history to the photon independent of the full measurement's context. Wheeler's delayed choice framing is often summarized as teaching that it is wrong to assign ordinary what was it doing all along reality to the photon before the measurement arrangement is complete. That is the pivot. The delayed choice does not mean a little particle was definitely a wave, then got nervous, then became a particle, then updated its resume. It means the final record selects which past description belongs to the experiment, using the mathematics beside me. The past description is not independent of the final context. A late measurement does not need to send a physical signal backward in time. The experiment is the whole structure. The final record determines which history can be consistently assigned to the whole structure. If you watch a mystery film, early in the film a character walks into a dark room. At the time, you do not know what happened. Later, in the final scene, reveals that the character found a letter, or hit a key, or saw a photograph, or did something. The late scene changes the meaning of that earlier scene. But did the final scene time travel backward and physically alter the first scene? No, it selected the interpretation of the earlier scene. The final edit determines the coherent story. The double slit and delayed choice forces us to stop imagining the particle's past as a little classical movie running behind the apparatus. The past we assign belongs to the full experimental context. You have to assign it a history. This is why this math matters. Now, if we bring in the delayed choice quantum eraser, the experiment is often presented in popular form as if it proves the future changes the past. The basic idea involves entangled photons and the available erasure of which path information in the well-known commit-all setup. The signal photon is detected. The entangled partner, the idler photon, is later measured in ways that allow the data to be sorted into interference compatible to past compatible subgroups, which sounds like sorcery, which is topics for other space-time moments and videos. A photon hits a detector. Later, another measurement is made. Then, after sorting the data, inference patterns appear in some subsets and not others. So the question becomes, Did the future erase the past? And the careful answer is not in the crude time machine sense, but it did use this mathematics that I'm pointing to beside me. Reality equals quantum mechanics, the Born rule, times space-time expectations, even from the future. Popular descriptions of delayed choice quantum eraser experiments can be misleading. Kastner argues that these experiments do not literally erase information and do not demonstrate retrocausation beyond ordinary quantum correlations. Qureshi similarly argued that the experiment is often misunderstood and does not require a genuine retrocausal effect. But I've seen them. I think that it seems to imply retrocausality. Retrocausality is the only way to explain a lot of things, entanglement, etc. But the retrocausality in this mathematics is collapse-based. It's not faster than time light-based. In this sort of mathematics, our expectations of thumbs bias a history where we personally had to live as crabs to learn to grab. So we biased a hand-learning history for ourselves in this mathematics. So there's a teleology retrocausal aspect. So this makes the answer more precise. This mathematics gives an answer. It resolves it. The quantum eraser does not give us a telephone to yesterday. It gives us something more subtle. The final pattern depends on how the total record is sorted, what kind of which path information is available in the full experimental arrangement. Again, history is not a tiny classical film strip. History is a record-compatible structure. The signal's photons' raw detections alone do not simply display an inference pattern. The inference-like structure emerges when the data are sorted according to the correlated idler outcomes. Without that correlation information, you do not get usable retrocausal message. That is why it does not allow faster than light or backward time signaling. But the philosophical shock remains. The history we assign is not independent of the final measurement context. We are always inside of the experiment. Now we can state the deeper parts about quantum mechanics in that it supplies possible histories. And that's the Born rule. Measurement context determines which histories can become record compatible. The final result is not merely a dot on the screen, it is a dot inside a completed experimental story, and that story must be coherent. This is where the Born-Hilborn rule enters naturally. On the screen you'll see the mathematics. Quantum mechanics reality equals quantum mechanics multiplied by space-time expectations, even in the perceived future. The Born rule gives the ordinary quantum weighting of possible outcomes. The Hilborn rule adds expectation across space-time, the observer state, the apparatus, the future record, the meaning of the measurement, the memory of the result, and the final coherent history into which the result must fit. The result is not merely an isolated outcome. The result is a selected history, an interpretation that has tremendous explanatory powers and opens the door to solutions to millennial math, future engineering, psychology, even a formula for spirituality itself. As life would become a dreamscape in perception, a thicker dream state due to the vast amount of registry or global consistency from every observer, we interact with here, this is in this earth-air environment. A temporal mind becomes too large for a brain body. So this is an idealism interpretation of quantum mechanics. Makes life a dreamscape that we safely wake up from. Selected history is the necessary takeaway here. That is the theme of this mathematics. We select a history. Copenhagen collapse gives us a random history. A live or dead cat comes with a random history. It comes with a live or dead history. The unopened vial of poison, there's a history. So while it was in superposition, once it's collapsed, it also collapsed the entire history, randomly according to Copenhagen. And that needs to be fixed by the mathematics on the screen. We have to select a history that's coherent. Or else our 5th birthdays and our graduations were all random, according to the Copenhagen interpretation. And the majority of physicists today that believe in the Copenhagen interpretation don't consider that the history of it is random. So selecting history is the takeaway here. That is the theme. That is the thesis. That is the mechanics of all. This video has the mathematics of reality. This mathematics finishes quantum mechanics in a satisfactory way. Think history selection. Death is safe in this model as a waking up process. Up until a biologist can discover improved brain memory, a feat this math stipulates is impossible. My TV remote and brain can both light up when activated without proving either store movies. Apes are forced to believe singers live inside the radio because of wisdom of the crowds. Every ape is certain the singer must live in the radio. Coco has passed to live again. History is selected so we create our personal evolution, our personal growth implying reincarnation and whatnots. I have other videos on this math. History matters. So in the double slit, the question is no longer did the electron go through the left slit or the right slit. The question becomes which class of histories did the full experiment select. If the path remains indistinguishable, the selected history is inference compatible. If the path becomes recorded and distinguished, the selected history is path compatible. If the measurement choice is delayed, the selected history is still the history compatible with the entire final arrangement. If the data are sorted through the quantum eraser, the recovered pattern belongs to the correlated defined history, not into magical editing yesterday. So see what this does. It removes the silly idea that the particle must have been one thing all along, in the way baseball is one thing all along. It also improves on the idea that collapse is just a random final event. A random final event is not enough because every final event needs a compatible history that led to that final event. Coherently, a dot on a screen needs a path description or an inference description depending on the whole arrangement. It also needs a history. A detection photon needs a record context. A measurement outcome needs a history. Every outcome needs a history. This is the phrase that we need to remember. History is selected. History is selected. Every outcome needs a history. Copenhagen-style collapse says measurement gives us an outcome. That's useful, yes. Predictively powerful, yes. But explanatory? It leaves the most interesting part out. What happened to the cat before when it was in superposition? It had to have had a history. What history did the outcome select? If Copenhagen says the outcome appears randomly, the entire cat, whether it's alive or dead, that's depending on the 50-50 chance. But once we get something out of superposition, the entire history of the cat would appear randomly. From the future, it would just randomly collapse the entire history of that cat's entire life in the Copenhagen. And if we extrapolate that to humans and us, then we would be collapsing our own graduations and 5th birthdays and first kisses at this very moment whenever we blink and collapse our current reality. So Copenhagen says that we collapse randomly. This mathematics says that we need to select a coherent history. So the future weights the outcomes also. It biases the outcomes. If Copenhagen says the outcome appears randomly according to the Born rule, then the compatible history also arrives by that random selection. That is the random history generation smuggled in under the respectable cloak of Heisenberg and Bohr. Copenhagen gives us the dot and forgets the biography. It gives us the cat alive and forgets the living cat past. It gives us the photon detected and forgets the experiment history that made that detection meaningful. It gives us the final page and hope nobody asks who wrote the chapter before it. Now, we can calculate with Copenhagen. Nobody's denying the calculations. The mathematics works, the predictions work, the laboratory results work, but interpretation matters when we ask what reality is. Copenhagen is just a recipe. The Born-Hilborn mathematics on your screen, it explains everything. This is why the double slit is such a powerful doorway and mathematical anomaly, because the experiment already teaches that the path is not a simple classical fact. It teaches that history depends on what becomes record compatible. And Born-Hilborn says yes. Now generalize that. Reality is not merely outcome selection. Reality is history selection. Think of it on a macro level. Quantum possibility supplies the alternatives. Space-time expectation supplies the weighting. The coherent history is selected. So, if you're a materialist, I should be gentle here. Materialism is a useful habit. It works beautiful for chairs, engines, scalpels, grocery carts, and tax receipts. It's very good for ordinary objects. If you stub your toe on a table, but it's not helpful to say, oh, that table is a selected history. It doesn't do you any good. The table has already made its argument. But quantum foundations is not furniture. At the quantum level, the thing had a definite property all along, and measurement merely revealed it becoming adequate. You used your toe to measure the table. That was your doing. Double-skit is not impressed by solid object thinking. Delayed choice is not impressed by linear time biography. The quantum world doesn't seem to like time at all. It just ignores it totally. Quantum eraser experiments are not impressed by ordinary record assumptions. The experiments keep telling us the final story depends on the whole arrangement. So science does not mean materialism. Science means disciplined explanation. If the disciplined explanation requires us to replace little pellet histories with record-compatible selected histories, then materialism must adapt or step aside. I was going to say, it's okay. One does not get to wave a tiny flag labeled matter and declare the problem solved. Matter may be the stable appearance of selected history, but in everyday life we think measurement is a camera. The camera photographs what was already there. Quantum mechanics says, not so fast. In the double slit, the measurement arrangement helps define what kind of there can become part of the record. If no which path camera exists, the history is not allowed to become a left door or right door story. If the which path camera exists, the history becomes route compatible and interference disappears. A camera in a courtroom does not merely collect pixels, it changes what the court can responsibly claim. The detector in quantum mechanics does not merely peek, it helps determine which history can be entered into the ledger. And that ledger matters. The word ledger is useful. Reality is built on records. Every loci of comparison is collapsing their expectations, their bias onto the world and all of us. We all add to the global consistency. Reality has records. This Earth Air has thicker records because of the abundance of people that all contribute to this one realm. Detector collects our records. Screens are records. Memories are records. Brains are just records of, but they're not, the brains are the records. The brains don't store records. The measurement problem was never a problem in this interpretation. This interpretation on your screen removes both the measurement problem and the hard problem of consciousness when understood. A record is not just an event. It is an event that must fit with other events, and more importantly, a consistently weighted future, which is our full motivation. To give that cat its bowl of milk when it expects it. Every observer matters. Even the cat expecting a bowl of milk waits past consistent with cows, meadows, farmers, ancestry, and a universe large enough and old enough to contain them all. All from one cat expecting what it is entitled to. According to the cat, limitless cream. And the more widely a record is embedded, observed, and sometimes acted upon, the more rigid the selective history becomes. The more rigid, the thicker the realm. This is why delayed choice experiments do not give us chaotic time travel. They give us retrocausal effects and teleology in a more sensible fashion through a collapse from the future observers. It's a weight. They show us that the final measurement context helps determine the valid description of the experiment. They do not allow you to send a message into yesterday or rewrite a public record. We will not ever be able to go back in time. We will not ever be able to surpass the speed of light. That is because the past has already collapsed and it's biased from the future. That is why we experience time in a forward-moving direction. And this mathematics on your screen is also the solution to quantum gravity, another video. So, the past is not a hallway. The past is a selected portion of the ledger. Before the history is fully fixed, future context may help determine which past description is meaningful. After the history is recorded and integrated, later selections must remain compatible with it. This is exactly why Born-Hilborn can allow future-weighted history without collapsing into science fiction. No little photon needs to run backward through a time. The whole experiment is selected as one coherent structure. We're always inside the experiment. This is why no signaling survives. The delayed choice quantum eraser does not let us send useful information backward in time because the interference appears only after sorting correlated data. It is not visible as a controlled message in the raw local detections, and relativity is kind of funky as it is. So Born-Hilborn is not saying my thought commands photons. We're not saying that they're ones. It is saying thoughts, apparatus, record, expectation, outcome belong to the history being selected. And that distinction matters. A thought is not omnipotent. A thought is a weight, a vote. Expectation is not magic. Expectation is history weight. The apparatus is not passive. It is part of the selection context. The observer is never outside of the experiment. The observer is inside the history. Now we can, if the final measurement context determines which past description is meaningful and delayed choice, then perhaps history itself is not what classical materialism says it is. Classical materialism imagines the past as a fixed chain of little facts, already definite, already complete, waiting behind us, like furniture in a storage room. Clickety, clickety, click. Quantum mechanics suggests something stranger. The past that becomes meaningful is the past compatible with the final record. It's like the past has to lead to the future in a logical, sensical way. We had to live as crabs to learn thumbs. If we expect to have thumbs now, then we personally had to evolve through many reincarnational lifetimes to back to when we were crabs learning to grab. We were fish to learn lungs and breathing. We were fish to learn movement and gills. We drive fancy bipedal human avatars all shiny, but we had to have a past compatible with the future. If in the double slit, if interference is preserved, the meaningful history is not left slit or right slit, but it is an interference compatible history of which path information is recorded. The meaningful history is path compatible. If the final arrangement is delayed, the meaningful description still depends on the completed experiment and the math on the screen. So history is not merely what little pellet did while no one looked. History is the coherent account selected by the total arrangement. So it's not Copenhagen. This isn't Copenhagen. This is Copenhagen. We're just using Copenhagen as an example for the collapse as the random history. We're using Copenhagen for the paradox of the random history it presents. Because Copenhagen is related to this, but it opens the door to a random history that we're taking away in this new model, this Born-Hilborn rule. Because Born gives us the quantum amplitudes in quantum mechanics, and the Hilborn rule gives us space-time expectations, even in the future, are all multiplied into the it makes us select the history. So this is the they're not the same. If the outcome becomes definite, what makes the compatible history definite? And why this history rather than another? That's why this mathematics gives the answer. The Born rule gives quantum possibility. The Hilborn rules adds the space-time expectations. Reality selects the coherent history. This does not replace quantum calculation. It interprets what the calculation means. You still keep all your math. You just add more. It says the math on the screen is not merely predicting dots, it is weighting histories. So, and many worlds says every outcome happens in some branch. The electron goes through all compatible histories across branching worlds. That saves the universal wave function, but it refuses to select the one history and gives us an immortal cat. So it keeps the entire warehouse of cats. And Pilot says this mathematics gives us one world that we know and love. Pilot Wave says the particle had a real hidden trajectory guided by the wave that gives us a path, but the path is not directly available without entering the measurement problem again. It tries to rescue the little route, and it uses averages and weak measurements, and it averages. It doesn't track nothing. It gives averages. It tracks averages. It doesn't track anything. Copenhagen says the outcome appears through measurement and often declines to describe the underlying reality. It gives us useful rules and then politely closes the philosophical door. Born-Hilborn says the real object is not the tiny path. The real object is the selected history. The double slit asks why interference or path. Born-Hilborn answers because the experimental context selects the interference-compatible or path-compatible history. Delayed choice asks how can a late measurement change the story. Born-Hilborn answers because the selected history is determined by the full arrangement, not by a tiny classical biography assigned prematurely. Quantum eraser asks how can sorting later reveal interference. Born-Hilborn answers because the final record structure sorts the histories in correlation-compatible classes. The recurring answer is the same. History selection, history selection, history selection. You are not an electron at a slit. You are not a photon in an interferometer. You are a person, a living observer, a non-biology Markov blanket itself. A boundary between inside and outside. But right now you're in a bio. It's okay. Our Markov blanket is another term for our soul. But it's not the biology related. A boundary between inside and outside. You receive thoughts. You remember a past. You expect a future. That's your Markov blanket. So you act. You measure. You record. You love, fear, hope, worry, and decide. Materialism says your mind is produced inside the brain. The brain stores memory. Thought is local neural computation. The past is simply back there. The future is not yet. Measurement is passive. Matter is primary. Born-Hilborn says, oh, that's silly and crazy. No. The brain is not irrelevant. Of course the brain matters. Damage the brain and memory expression changes. Alter the brain, thought changes. Nobody serious can deny that. But if history itself is selected through measurement and record, the memory is not merely a storage problem. Memory may be relation to that selected history itself. The brain may be interface, tuner, filter, and access mechanism. Break a radio and the music stops. That proves the radio matters. It does not prove the singer lived inside the radio. If you damage the brain and memory expression changes, that proves the brain matters. It does not prove the entire past is stored in that tissue. The double slit told us the classical story behind the record is not as simple as we thought. If we apply that to memory, remember childhood is not merely a neural file. It's the selected history that we choose. It is the present observer relating to that selected history. A remembered birthday needs a birthday history, not a fictional undiscovered brain engram. Mankind is still looking for memory and consciousness within our noggin. It's a futile effort according to the mathematics on our screen. Idealism isn't a bad thing if you understand it. We create a reality every night when we go to sleep. I don't know why a shared dream is such a hard concept for materialists. A remember parent needs a parent history. A remember life needs a life history. Every outcome needs a history, and we don't just see the alive or dead cat. The real paradox is the random history the Copenhagen interpretation applies at the deeper level. Every memory needs its history. Every self-personification that we are, or less biological Markov blankets if you want the more mathematical term for your very soul, which requires a history. To personify you. You're a personification. Lifetime to lifetime we grow using the mathematics on our screen. If you are your relation to thoughts in this fashion, please note that this math gives a very mechanical outlook to what we are, what our very afterlives are, if understood. It is blessed in the fact it means our thoughts are manifesting can bring the past to bring us the thumbs and things we desire and expect. If learned, if you feel alive and individual now, know that you will always feel individual and as yourself, even after our version of death, because of this math. But we're here for reasons and to learn, so make a best go of it as you can. This is an idealism format. where life is a thicker dreamscape because it has more registration, more global observer consistency. Desires have attached worries, so the math goes in two ways. Daydreaming vs worry, to get less technical, arrive together, the original sin of mankind. A middle path is prone to less drama. This mathematics tells you how to react to this video. It has profound implications if it explored. Now, future measurement context can be determined which past description becomes meaningful in quantum experiments. Then future observers are not irrelevant to history. The future is not nothing. In a block universe view, future observers belong to the space-time structure. Their existence matter. Their existence requires compatible pasts that we're a part of. A future breathing organism requires gas exchange histories. Plants are breath before lungs. A future hand requires grip histories. Crabs are grip rehearsals. Humans in practice. A future child requires reproduction, nurturing, protection, pain avoidance, social bonding, and desire. Sex drive is not merely biology losing its composure. It is future observers being extremely persistent about having ancestors. They choose a history in where we procreate. So we say that's teleology, but it's explained by the mathematics on our screen because they bias a history in which they exist. But this is mathematically serious, as funny as it may sound. Future compatible outcomes wait past compatible histories. That is teleology in Born-Hilborn form. It's not cartoon magic, not a bearded mechanic in the sky assembling thumbs with pliers, magic pliers and bolts of lightnings, not wish hard and get furniture. This is a history selection. Quantum possibility supplies the alternatives. Space-time expectation weights them. The coherent history is the one selected and the one we see. Natural selection, Darwinism, describes the mechanism from behind. Born-Hilborn adds the weight from ahead. So this is also Aristotle's teleology. Now return to the double slit one more time. An electron does not need to be imagined as a tiny pellet hiding a root. The experiment chooses between histories, interference compatible or path compatible. The delayed choice experiment shows that in the final measurement, context matters to the history we can assign. The quantum eraser shows that correlations and record sorting determine whether interference compatible structures can be recovered. The lesson is not that the nature is irrational. The lesson is that our old picture was too small. We needed this math. A particle is not merely a thing. A measurement is not merely a peak. A record is not merely a note. A past is not merely a trail. A reality is the selection of one coherent history. That is why this mathematics has such explanatory power. It does not treat collapse as random or magic. It does not multiply worlds indefinitely like Everett Many Worlds. It does not reduce the experiment to a hidden Pellet root like Pilot Wave. It says what becomes real is the history selected under quantum possibility, under expectation, space-time expectation. So Copenhagen-style collapse, taken as random outcome selection, has enormous predictive utility, but as a metaphysical picture, it asks us to accept that reality's final facts appear by blind probability, that our histories are somehow random. That is very strange. So Copenhagen's got to go. But the deeper implication is worse. If an outcome requires a history, the random outcome collapse implies random history collapse. A dot appears on a screen and the whole compatible experiment history comes with it. A cat is alive and the whole survival history comes with it. A cat is dead and the whole death history comes with it. A person remembers a childhood and the remember past must fit the present. If all of this is mere random selection, then Copenhagen is not just rolling dice for outcomes, it is rolling dice for biographies. That deserves some little ridicule. Scientific ridicule. The polite kind that says, lovely calculation, now please explain the past you just smuggled in with your non-equations. Copenhagen gives us a sheet and forgets the purchase. It doesn't. Born-Hilborn asks to see the ledger of the history. That is why the Born-Hilborn rule is better as an explanation. It asks for the whole account. So the math again is on the screen. The Born rule tells us the quantum mechanics allows and how strongly it is allowed. The Hilborn rule tells us that expectation of space-time adds weight. The selected observer weighted observer collapse, WOC. The selected world is not merely the most convenient outcome, it is the coherent history. That is why consciousness matters. Consciousness is thoughts come from the weights from the future. I have other videos on that. That's a different topic. An observer is not a ghost outside physics. An observer is a Markov blanketed center of comparison inside the selected history. The observer has memory, expectation, attention, desire, fear, and record-making power. Those are not decorative side effects. They are weighting structures. A thought points towards a possible history. A worry points towards a feared history. A desire points toward a preferred history. A disciplined expectation stabilizes a history. A shared expectation becomes collective structure. Thought does not command the universe individually. Thought contributes weight. Again, not a magic wand, a vote, a weight, participation in the selection of history with global consistency. This is why the double slit matters for consciousness. It shows that the record structure of reality matters. If the record structure matters, then observers and memory matter. If observers and memory matter, then thought cannot be dismissed as meaningless steam rising from brain tissue. Thought is not outside the experiment of reality. Thought is one of the ways the experiment becomes history. Thought is involved in this mathematics. It cannot be inside of a brain. Now the room should feel different. The double slit is no longer a cute paradox about a particle being weird. It is the opening crack in the old materialist wall. Once you see the measurement selects record-compatible histories, you can no longer pretend reality is merely little objects carrying fixed biographies through time. You can still use material descriptions. You can say they're real. You can knock on wood. They are practical. They build bridges, cure disease, design computers that keep airplanes in the sky. But underneath, the foundation is strange and more beautiful. Reality is not random collapse. We have a purpose. Reality is not blind gears. Reality is merely dead matter accidentally inventing thought. Reality is selected history. And history selection is not cold. It is mathematical, but it is alive with implication. The same principle that decides whether interference remains in a double slit experiment opens the door to a universe where future observers matter, where memory is relation to selected history, where consciousness is not a disposable accident, and where death may be not an observed deletion, but part of the larger teleological progression of a selected experience. But that is not the main experiment today. That is just a side topic. I have other videos. The double slits points towards it. Delayed choice points towards it. The quantum eraser points towards what I'm talking about. The count in the box points towards it. Every measurement asks what history can become real. Every record asks what past does this require to make this coherent. Every observer asks what world am I helping select? With every blink. Now let us close with the simplest possible picture. Imagine the screen behind the slits. At first one dot appears. Then another. Then another. Each dot seems isolated, but over time a pattern emerges. That is how quantum experiments teach us. One observation is a dot. Many observations reveal structure. Now think of your own life the same way. One thought, one memory, one choice, one fear, one desire, one act of kindness, one moment of courage, one avoided cruelty, one word spoken at the right time. Each seems like a dot, but together they form a history. And that history is not accidental noise. It is weighted and it is selected using the mathematics on your screen. It is coherent or it fails to be and vanishes with decoherence. Born-Hilborn says the universe is not merely showing us dots. It is selecting the pattern you already know as you. The double slit shows that alternatives can interfere until a record selects the kind of history that can be told. Delayed choice shows that the final context matters to the story we assign. Quantum eraser shows that record correlation determines which patterns can be recovered. Copenhagen gives us randomness and asks us not to ask too many biographical questions. Born-Hilborn asked the biographical question first. What happened? What history did reality select for us? And when that question is asked clearly, the answer is obvious. This math should be intuitive and obvious. The particles did not merely choose a slit. The experiment selected a history. The cat did not merely become alive or dead. Reality selected a compatible past. The observer does not merely watch. The observer participates in watching. The mind does not merely float above matter. The mind is one of the ways history becomes coherent. The future does not merely wait. The future helps weight, W-E-I-G-H-T, the past that can lead to it. That is why the final lesson is blessed. It is optimistic. If reality is selected history, then life is not a meaningless accident drifting through dead matter. Life is the universe learning how to select coherence. Thought matters. Memory matters. Expectations matter. That's faith. Love matters. Future observers matter. And every measurement, every memory act of attention is part of the great pattern-forming process. The double slit was never just about a particle. It was about the kind of universe in which a particle, an observer, a memory, a future, and a history can belong to one coherent world. That world is not random collapse. That world is selected history. History selection. History selection. History selection. And once you see it, the old question, which slit did it go through, becomes too small. The better question is, what history did reality select? That is the mathematics. Quantum possibility weighted by space-time expectation selecting one coherent world. And that is why the double slit is not a mystery. It is an invitation, a tiny particle striking a screen one dot at a time, teaching us that reality has always been choosing its story. A story we all view as our own.